You can start. There we go. You know, I like art, and I'm married to an artist, which really helps. And Deb is forever giving me guidance. And we all see and know the consequences of times of uncertainty and insecurity. The slide you see before you here is the Laundress by Domé. And Domé, in his time, in the mid-19th century, depicted social problems of the time. It was very unusual, I might add, for an artist at that time to show a poor woman and child on her way to work. But Domé depicted life as he saw it and the injustices thereof. Next slide, please. And here's another one of his, The Uprising, depicting social unrest, the desperate rising up. Next slide. Katja Kollwitz, of German origin, and she painted, her work was the latter part of the 19th century and the 20th century. And here we see the devastation of a father watching his wife and children sick and starving. And Kollwitz's subjects were patients in her husband's surgery in Berlin in the early 20th century. Next slide, please. And here we have the weavers and more social unrest, which often leads to violence. And so this is the Silesian uprising that happened in the late 1800s in Central Europe, which is now present southwest Poland. Now, what I'm going to show you next is very different from what you've seen. Go ahead, Jim. I don't know how well you can see this. This is Julie Maretu, who is a can I give this to somebody? I'm going to knock that over. She is of Somalian, actually Ethiopian rather, in the Horn of Africa. She was an immigrant, and she lives in New York, and she's really quite celebrated. This is called a migration direction map. And if you looked at this closely, maybe the choir can see this. I don't know if okay. You see arrows all along here. And if you find this drawing somewhat confusing, then it has served its purpose this morning. This early preparatory drawing of Maretu's is distinct, and I'm going to show you the finished product in a moment. But its arrows fill contour lines that diagram nomadic populations transnationally. Though these figures are closed shapes, they maintain porous boundaries, repeatedly overlapping and merging to indicate something akin to contact zones, places where itinerant communities converge, clash, and form social cultural boundaries. I've selected this particular painting today, with Deb's help, to depict uncertainty. You don't find many paintings that are painted about uncertainty. Go ahead, show the next one, Jim. This is that's the finished product. That's worth millions today. And because it is talking about the impact of migration upon us in our present day and age. And from a global perspective, I can't think of anything that depicts the feelings of uncertainty as much as migration does. It inflicts tens of millions of people around the world today. Tens of millions. 2 days, the United States will go to the polls. And one of the most important issues that their election is about immigration and what's happening at the southern border. And migration is worldwide, and it is a real concern in the times in which we live. So art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. That's what someone said, and I think that's an accurate phrase. So I'm talking about uncertainty today. And I think we'd all be in agreement that uncertainty is a reality of the times in which we live. But more importantly, this morning, it appears to be exacerbated in our time. Today, we face serious existential uncertainties in the larger world. All this uncertainty takes its toll on us. Now, the International Monetary Fund has drawn research from Bloom and Fersidi that addresses uncertainty in the global markets. Now, bear with me because I'm going somewhere with all of this. The research concludes that despite the global economy's post-pandemic resilience, economic disruption is likely from a myriad of transformative forces such as, next slide please, you can see these are climate change, geopolitical fragmentation, conflict, digitalization, combined with cyber risks and artificial intelligence. Their findings suggest that the unpredictability of these forces translates into a shock-prone world. The immediate future promises to be one of continued high uncertainty. Next slide, please. Now that may appear to be confusing. This is called the World Uncertainty Index. And the IMF, they are using that in some of their publications right now. And I think you would have to agree with me that much of today's uncertainty is generated by unpredictable global financial fluctuations, which have intensified in recent years. Now, if this resembles your mutual fund, you might want to consider selling because right now it's pretty high, right here. What I want to show you, show me the next slide, please. What this graph depicts, it comes from 143 different countries, and it goes back in time providing data for the past 60 years on a quarterly basis. So the index captures uncertainty that relate to economic and political events, and these are some of those that are listed there, mostly some from the American context, but others from the global context. And these events are the assassination of President Kennedy back in the 60s, the Vietnam War, the gold crisis of the 60s, the oil crisis of the 70s, 9/11, the 2008 global financial crisis, and American presidential elections and so forth. Most of you here have lived through all of those. And they spike at various times and creating more and more uncertainty. Next slide, please. So the research indicates that global uncertainty has increased significantly since 2012. Now, I tried to block that here, as you can see. Since 2012, research indicates that we are in a sustained period of uncertainty, according to Marcus. And uncertainty rocketed exponentially, and we're still reeling from its effects. And this doesn't take into account COVID and what the pandemic did to us internationally in terms of the insecurity and uncertainty that it brought to us. And so this is especially So for the generations that are coming up behind most of us here today, most of us are boomers here, the majority. But insecurity and uncertainty that is bred by insecurity is far more intense for the generations that are coming up behind us as boomers. It's far more intense for them. Now let me talk about, next slide please, the socio-political impact of insecurity and uncertainty. Now, sociologists are following how today's sustained economic insecurity and uncertainty manifest socio-politically from a cultural perspective. And would you hit that again, please, Jim? I think there's an animation there. Insecurity and its associated uncertainty tends to spark an authoritarian reflex when many close ranks behind strong leaders in reaction to perceived threats and grievances. We are experiencing this globally. Populist and authoritarian leaders in the political arena are on the rise, and we're seeing that in spades south of the border. It has been showed that hard times make some people more susceptible to racist, reactionary, and sexist appeals. Next slide, please. The impact of today's insecurity and uncertainty is very much subjective. It has much to do with one's sense of the future or uncertainty about what awaits them just over the horizon. And for many today, uncertainty and insecurity have loosened their moorings. They feel adrift with no safe harbor in view. Next slide, please. How does this affect us in the church? We are not immune to what is experienced around us. Part of the challenge that we are facing in the church writ large today is the co-optation of certain of our numbers, especially those on the right theologically. Authoritarian themes are increasingly heard from their pulpits, which in turn are finding place within the people. And across the world, the reactionary far right has gained ground by speaking directly to isolated people's fears and anxieties and offering scapegoats to blame. Immigrants are castigated. They're taking our jobs. They're contributing to the housing crisis, an added strain on universal health care. Minorities are targeted, LGBTQ plus community in particular. Muslims, the Jewish communities are criticized and targeted for their anti-Christian message. Hate crimes in some instances are up almost 300% during this time in which we're living. There is much anger emanating from these congregations. A militancy has emerged that is disturbing. How is it that they are embracing a form of Christianity that is markedly and undeniably unchristian, all the while believing it is the true message? So the question that I ask myself is, what is driving this increasingly overt aggression and hostility within certain Christian circles? What or who is behind this type of messaging? Next slide, please. I want to introduce you to Nancy McLean. And this book called Democracy and Change is quite a phenomenal publication. She's getting a lot of attention right now. She's an historian out of Duke University and is getting, like I say, quite a bit of attention these days. You see her on various talk shows. According to her research, there are influential individuals, wealthy people, who wield much power behind the scenes within North American society, in the States and in Canada, to a lesser degree. Now, this next slide, go ahead, Jim. This next slide, I want you to take this in. Because this, don't worry, it's just a whistle. Okay. She says this: to achieve their ends, these people, they willfully deceive trusting people. They purposefully withhold the truth of their intentions in order to take these people to a place where on their own, given complete information, they probably would never go. That is profound in my estimation. And it really depicts some of what is transpiring and why we find things like Christian nationalism on the rise, where people are being deceived, people are being co-opted because they are such a huge voting bloc. It's really concerning. The predicament in which we find ourselves, where significant numbers of our population within and without the church who fall within this category of the uninformed and ill-advised. Next slide, please. Rather than provoking a challenge to power or the liberation of the spirit, which is what we are about as Christians, authoritarian politics uses religious institutions and ideas as vehicles for judgment and domination in its demands for conformity of behavior, othering of outgroups, and uniformity of thought. Next slide. The Good Samaritan. What has happened here is that there is a distorted view of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Christ has taught us that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. And even when the suffering neighbor is a member of perhaps an unpopular outgroup, as the Jews were to the Samaritans. But people experiencing insecurity and its metastasizing uncertainty are vulnerable to those who would offer an alternative version of the Good Samaritan. Their ideology suggests that the Christian ethic of helping someone in need is not what is needed after all. From their perspective, providing assistance only encourages the recipient to exploit the giver rather than taking the responsibility of solving their own problems. And bring that slide back up again, Jim. And according to them, a helping hand up only leads to a perpetual handout, which becomes justification for taking no responsibility for the other. Okay, so but what of us? What about us as believers? This is not the whole story. But we all must admit that uncertainty is a part of our living reality today. But however, in the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. For uncertainty itself forms the basis for all hope. Hope is the embrace of the unknown and the unknowable. And that's because in the spaciousness of uncertainty, we come face to face with our freedom. Not an illusionary freedom, but authentic freedom to act, to make a difference to God and to the world. So in coping with difficult circumstances, we may find ourselves considering approaches to life that perhaps we normally would not have given ourselves to, and as such, hope wells up within us. Another factor to creating hope within is the importance of belongingness, connectedness, and external social support. Loneliness eats away at well-being and good mental health. We all know that, but today belongingness is at a premium. Now, I'm at Rideau Park now, been there since September, and you all know that all their clergy retired. No problem, they just got old and decided it was time to retire. I tried that twice, it hasn't worked yet. And Jim Baldwin, Reverend Jim Baldwin, is there on a full-time basis for a year, and he does pulpit ministry and pastoral care, committee work. I've been hired to guide them through a transition process, a discernment process, as they endeavor to come to terms with where they've been, where they are, and where they're going, and with a view to hiring clergy in the not-too-distant future. Next slide, please. Our purpose statement is as follows. Our purpose is to listen and learn and make recommendations on how to move forward thoughtfully as a community of faith. That's what we are about. I have 8 individuals with whom I'm working, and we are in the midst of doing something that I'm calling essential consultations. And we are setting up meetings with committees and individuals within the church, but we're also drawing on the community of Alta Vista, community leaders, bringing them in and having them speak to us. We need their perspective if we were to do a proper needs analysis and data collection. Now, I have met with Councillor Marty Carr, Ward 18, and have spoken with her at length, and also Stephanie Glover, who is the chair of the Alta Vista Community Association. And we met with people from Marty Carr's office this past Monday evening, and Wednesday rather. And also, but Stephanie was to be there, but she couldn't because she was ill. But she sent something to me, and because we had coffee together, and she said, as I shared with you, I believe the community, I can give this a slide. I'm sorry, I'm going ahead of you. I believe the community, including families, want somewhere to belong. Now, this is the chair of the Community Association. Okay? They want somewhere to belong. This is exacerbated in the times in which we live, uncertainty. I want to read to you something that I read in The Guardian. If you don't read The Guardian out of England, the UK, you probably should. This is an article, and I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here, by John Harris. John Harris is an agnostic, but he wrote something quite profound, I felt, in The Guardian, and I want to share it with you because I think it resonates with who we are and where we are. He says, there is a tension in the 21st century life that may come close to defining how millions of us now live. Whenever we want to commune with other people, we need only to reach for an object the size of a chocolate bar, and there they are, scores of acquaintances and a veritable galaxy of complete strangers, offering insights and opinions on a huge range of subjects. But our online lives too often revolve around a mixture of anger, silliness, and superficiality. He goes on to say, where do we go and who can we find to meaningfully share our thoughts about life's inescapable fundamentals? Love, loss, death, fear, bereavement, regret. To properly do so might require real-world company, which can be an equally big task. Think about all this, and you will sooner or later collide with something that predates the internet. Now, here's a phrase that I think is very powerful. He said, the long and steady secularization of life in the West and the vast social holes it has left. That's the reality out there. People are coming to realize that after a couple of decades with the internet. Once for all there, and now this is an agnostic speaking, so it's not necessarily complimentary of the church, but you wait for it. Once for all their inbuilt hypocrisies and worse, churches at least offered somewhere to ritualistically consider all of life's most elemental aspects. Now beyond communities with high levels of Christian observance, they are largely either empty or woefully underattended. Now, at the end of the article, because this article he's writing about a book written by Nick Cave, who was going through many of the same things that Harris was. He says, and this is what Nick Cave, he says, "To my considerable surprise, I have found some of my truths in the holy, fallible, often disappointing, deeply weird, and thoroughly human institution of the church." That's not necessarily complimentary, I realize. But he wrote, "At times, this is bewildering to me as it may be to you." And here Harris reflects on those phrases. He says, "Here I think lies the faint outline of a journey that more people may sooner or later take, and something I can just almost imagine. Slowly increasing numbers of people being pulled away from their screens towards something much more human and nourishing." Do you hear that? Human and nourishing. Those pews, in other words, may not stay vacant forever. The words of an agnostic. Last slide. I'm a devout agnostic, but I hunger for meaning in our chaotic world. You could change that in our uncertain world. Just let me say this in closing, and that is that we in the church, in a very real sense, are countercultural. When I was growing up, I'm a boomer, in the 60s. In the 60s, you know, the hippie movement and all that, they were countercultural. Well, in some respects, we are now. And the reason being is that the world is very much, because of social media, the internet, it has become very segmented. And people find themselves in echo chambers. And they have a select group that they are with, and they are not exposed to others. Not at all. And that's very detrimental. We weren't created for that kind of an existence. We simply weren't. So we in the church, we are countercultural in the sense that we're intergenerational. We have many, many different generations within our community of faith. And it's not just Christian, Jewish, Muslim, where people can come and be exposed to those of other generations and those who have different values, okay, that come with that. But what Harris is saying is that there's an emptiness out there. And there will be increasingly numbers of individuals who will pull away from that in search for community, in search for belonging, in search for connectedness. This is what we offer. This is who we are. And I believe, really, our future is bright, because we will be able to embrace these people as they come in search for that social context that they can't find out there. That's who we are. That's where we're going.